right now from KTAB News, your local election headquarters. This is Big Country Politics.
Thanks so much for being here for BCP. I'm Travis Ruiz, and we do start our broadcast with our eye on Abilene. As the pandemic continues, many industries continue to face staffing shortages, and right now we're asking Abilene's police chief how his department is doing amid this latest virus surge. KTAB's Mercedes Hernandez has that story, as well as the chief's goals for the department this coming year.
Abilene Police Chief Marcus Dudley says the current surge in local COVID cases has thankfully not had much impact on the department's daily operations.
We have been fortunate that as soon as a wave of folks have gone out, by the time they return, the next wave is needing to be out ill, and so it's allowed us to be able to transition without having to take some drastic measures.
He says in an effort to keep officers healthy, sanitizing has been a priority.
We're going to continue to keep doing decontamination efforts to try to make sure that our workspaces, our facility, to include the patrol vehicles that our folks are out working out of, get decontaminated as frequently as possible.
Looking at staffing overall, Chief Dudley says there are only a handful of positions that need filling.
Our authorized strength level is 216, and we currently have 205 sworn officers, so we are running short by about 11.
A police academy taking place right now could help fill a few of those open spots.
We brought in 17 folks, and so we're real excited about the potential. We would love to see all of those folks come out of the academy and get into our field training officer program.
In the new year, Chief Dudley wants to build on goals started in 2021, incorporating more tech, improving officers' mental health, and advocacy for crime victims.
And I'm confident that with the support of our elected officials, with the budgets that we've put forward, that we're going to be able to continue to make great strides.
Another goal is, of course, solving crime. He says APD's track record is pretty good going into 2022, something he definitely wants to continue.
Our persons investigators are at 100% clearance rate, and that is something that is remarkable. Crime suppression is a huge part of what we do.
In Abilene, with coverage you can count on. Mercedes Hernandez, KTAB News.
Now, expanding on that track record by persons investigators, Chief Dudley says of the 8 murders last year, one of which was a traffic fatality, all were solved. A decent track record indeed. All right, now looking at Taylor County, how is the pandemic affecting staffing at the sheriff's office? Well, the county commissioners stepping in to help that shortfall. KTAB's Miriam Chamberlain explains what commissioners did to help the sheriff.
Tuesday morning, the Taylor County Commissioners Court approving a 90-day extension for the 86-hour waiver at the sheriff's office.
When you're not at full staff like our sheriff's department is right now and the juvenile detention officers, you have salary that hasn't been allocated yet, and that's where the funding for this double time or 86-hour waiver goes into effect.
Commissioner Chuck Statler says this renewal allows applicable employees to receive overtime pay starting now at 80 hours during a 2-week period,
which provides compensation for our law enforcement people from the sheriff's office, the constable's office, juvenile detention officers.
Taylor County's Sheriff Ricky Bishop says the office recently increased their salary pay, hoping to attract more applicants.
We increased the salary to $40,000 back during the last budget, and we got an influx of applications, but they've slowed down a lot.
Fortunately, Taylor County has been able to add employees since the first waiver 2 years ago, but even standing at 250 employees, they're still roughly 10 short.
We have to keep a ratio of 1 officer for 48 inmates in the jail. Otherwise, the Texas Commission on Jail Standards would come in and they can actually shut you down and make you move prisoners until you can get to that ratio.
Although the shortage means deputies have to put in extra work and their off time is limited, Sheriff Bishop ensures their work is still being done efficiently.
We're going to cover everything the best we can and still be able to protect the public like we need to.
In Abilene, with coverage you can count on, Miriam Chamberlain, KTAB News.
All right, now the Sheriff's Office currently recruiting and hiring. We have more about that on the KTAB website. That's bigcountryhomepage.com. All right, going back to Abilene, the city of Abilene maintaining its parks and looking to the future. KTAB's Miriam Chamberlain back again and explains some of those changes, including one of those that is right now underway.
In Tuesday's Parks and Recreation meeting, members on the board brought up the issue of a park that's currently named after a Confederate leader, Robert E. Lee.
It was named after Lee School it was kind of in conjunction with Lee.
Board member says the park took on the name from the school across the street, Lee Elementary, which has since then been rebuilt and renamed Stafford Elementary.
When they renamed Lee to Stafford Elementary, the request has come in for the park.
Parks and Recreation Board is suggesting Stafford Park, but Assistant Director Chris Gibbons says they're seeking the citizens' help in deciding on its new name.
It's all driven by the community, and that's what we want, is the community to decide what they want those names to be.
As a vote will be held after recommendations are submitted to the board.
You have to have signatures from people in the community to identify whether they support the name change and so on.
Over at Stevenson Park, renovations are in full swing, revamping the atmosphere of this predominantly black neighborhood.
We've got a great representation for Stevenson.
This $400,000 project will include new tennis and basketball courts, restrooms, splash pads, and so much more.
We get a lot of feedback. We have really good dialogue and conversation with that group, and we're excited anytime we can have that kind of input because it helps us to do our jobs better.
And if all goes well, including weather, the work is expected to be done in time for Juneteenth. In Abilene, what coverage you can count on, Miriam Chamberlain, KTAB News.
Now, that next Parks and Rec Board meeting will be in mid-February with a public hearing for possible names for Lee Park. We'll keep you updated on that. All right, when we come back here on Big Country Politics, an outlook on politics in 2022 with Dr. Paul Fabrizio of McMurray University. We're back in 2 minutes.
Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
And welcome back to BCP. We're joined here by Dr. Paul Fabrizio, Professor of Political Science at McMurray University. Dr. Fabrizio, thanks so much for being here.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. So 2022, we're already half a month into it. And, we're recording this on a Thursday. So today is January 20th. And so 1 year ago today, President Biden was sworn into office, right?
Yes. And he had a press conference yesterday, almost 2 hours long. And one of the things that surprised me is he did not expect the Republicans to stonewall him as much as they did. And I heard that and I was surprised because Republicans made no bones about what they were going to do. And Biden just, I don't think, was aware of where the Republicans were at. And so that has affected his whole last year.
So that political division, obviously in full force right now, right?
Yes, indeed. It sure is.
Yeah.
We are a divided country. And if I can just share this with you, sure. Politico magazine did a poll and they asked people, are you moderate, liberal, conservative? And only 25% of the country calls themselves liberal. And you look at Joe Biden's agenda for the last year, and so much of it has come from that minority position. 37% are moderate, 36% of the country is conservative. We're a center-right country. But Biden, in his policies that he advocated last year, was not coming from that perspective. And I think it cost him.
Yeah, that his approval rating, obviously, right?
Yeah, about 40%. And it was above 50% until Afghanistan and the fall of Afghanistan, and it's just been a steady slide since then.
And obviously the big issue for him, and a big one in the press conference, was COVID-19.
Yes.
And so, we're 2 years, well, actually we are 2 years deep when we first discovered it, right? So 2 years deep into that, and his administration's response, what do you think about that?
They have really struggled. First of all, I think there's an arrogance on the part of everybody in the government that thinks we can control this. And it's a virus. The virus is not responding to political pressures. So I think there's a lack of humility on the part of government policymakers regarding this. There's so much we don't know. But despite that, the administration made a focus on vaccines, ignored testing. Well, vaccines only work if people get those vaccines, and there's about a third of the country that won't get those vaccines. That has consequences. And they didn't focus on testing. Now we're in the Omicron phase where we need testing. And so the administration has been catching up this whole way. And it's been very frustrating for them, but I think part of that is their own fault for overpromising what they could do.
One of the big things, and this last week, kind of a blow to the administration when the Supreme Court, they're not going to allow OSHA's rules to have mandatory vaccinations for businesses of 100 employees or more, right?
Yes. Yeah, and this was a bit of a surprise in one way, because you look at the history of the Supreme Court, they have mandated vaccines in the past, going back to 1905. So they've been in favor of it in the past. This time they overturned that precedent. But I think this is part of a larger movement, if you will, in part of the Supreme Court, where I think the Supreme Court is going to be moving to strip back some of the powers of the federal government vis-a-vis the states. And it's called the administrative state. And the Republican Party, conservatives have made a big push that the federal government has too much power. And court has granted them that power over time. But I think with the conservative majority on the Supreme Court, I think we're going to see more and more stripping away of that federal administrative power, that regulatory power. And I think this vaccine mandate decision that the Supreme Court had last week, I think is just the beginning of that stripping away of the power of the federal court.
And I'd say Texas is probably a pretty good example of trying to get a lot of that power back, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And, it's interesting because, conservatives always talk about power at the local level. And what we're seeing is power being stripped from the federal government, given back to the states. But here in the state of Texas, the power's at the state level. It's not at the local level. And legislative action by Governor Abbott, for example, is about taking power away from local people. Think about mask mandates, for example. He said you can't do it. That's the state level saying, local people, you can't do something. The idea of conservatism in the past has been local people should decide local issues. So,
back to President Biden, another issue which is a hot topic too, immigration. And so that's been a big talking point too. And here in Abilene, we've been affected by those planes that we reported on here on KTAB. So many of those planes, I think we're up to 3 or 4 right now, just full of these undocumented immigrants, and they're being taken to Anson, to Jones County, to some of these immigration places, and then sometimes being released into our own communities, and so it makes us a border county per se. What about Biden and his administration's response to the immigration?
Biden ran as someone who was competent about government, trying to distance himself, contrast himself with Donald Trump. Yet his administration never planned for the possibility that a new administration, an easing of COVID, would lead to a lot more people trying to come here. So they weren't ready for it. They were overwhelmed by it. And my suspicion is as we warm up in 2022, we're going to see a lot more immigrants trying to come here. And we're going to have similar problems down at the border. What do we do with all these people who are coming here? And it's simply because the administration wasn't ready for the people who came. You can't just throw out old regulations that Donald Trump had. It takes a while to get the bureaucracy going, get your people in place. And the Biden administration did not prepare for that possibility, which is why they've had the trouble.
Yeah, there's got to be a plan. And Congressman Arrington, who of course represents Abilene, a lot of the big country and South Plains area, he's been very outspoken against President Biden, his immigration policies, of course. And so, and he's really aligned himself with a lot of the Trump values too.
Yes. And in fact, at one point, he actually had some people who worked for Donald Trump's administration joining his staff. And so he knows that most of the voters out here are very, very much pro-Trump. So he is there leading them, following them, whichever you want to say. So, and by the way, it's not just him. Almost every single Republican in the House of Representatives is doing the exact same thing that Jody Arrington is doing.
Midterms it's going to be a big deal, right? And so I think we've seen a taste of what's to come.
Oh, yes, we have. And we political scientists, when we look at elections, we look at these midterm elections, history just looms so large for us. And what history tells us is that the president's party always loses seats in these midterm elections. And it's only a question of how many seats do they lose. And so we're looking at the House of Representatives. Republicans are the minority, but just barely. We anticipate, because Joe Biden's approval ratings are so low, that the Republicans are going to do really well and become the majority party. And I think almost any political scientist would say, you look at the situation right now, and it's almost locked in place that the Republicans will do well in November in the House of Representatives. The only question is, will they also be able to take over control of the Senate? And that, it's too soon to tell.
Very good. All right, we're taking a look at the national level. We'll take a look at state and a local look at 2022 when we come back with Dr. Paul Fabrizio. We'll be right back.
Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
All right, welcome back. Still joined here with McMurray University's Dr. Paul Fabrizio. Talked about national politics. I want to go to the state level, and we've got a big race at the state level too, and that's the race for governor. Governor Greg Abbott, of course, holding that spot and trying again. Now, the Republican side is its own race too, right?
Right.
So we've got a lot of folks vying for his position.
Right. In one sense, the governor's in the ideal position. Okay, he is being attacked on the right by conservative Republicans, and he's being attacked on the left by Democrats. And most politicians, believe it or not, when you go into a general election, want to be in the middle. And that's where our governor is going to end up being. But he has to get through the Republican primary. And I think he has 4 opponents who are challenging him in the Republican primary. And he has responded by becoming as conservative as they are. And that could cost him in the general election if the Democratic candidate, probably Beto O'Rourke, can demonstrate that the governor has become too conservative. But we got a long way to go.
Yeah.
The primaries are March 1st. The governor is blessed with a huge bank account. He is spending money. We've talked about
here
on the break. He's spending money here. And you know, this is Abilene, a very conservative place, and the governor is advertising here, which tells you that he's concerned about his standing with Republicans.
Yeah, and some of those other candidates, I've seen billboards. I think Huffines and Candy Cane Horn, some of those billboards all over too. So people are spending some money out there right now.
People are spending money. This is actually a really hot race, and you know, there's reasons for it. The governor has had issues with immigration, and he's being challenged about that. And also what happened last February with the energy situation. That happened under his watch. So he has to demonstrate that our energy situation is going to be good. You know, I think probably the worst case scenario for the governor is if we have a repeat of what took place last February. And then, you know, his opponents will just jump on him. You had 2 opportunities and you couldn't fix our energy problems. So he is hoping for a very mild winter.
Hoping for that, yeah. And I think everyone really is too, because we're having flashbacks to February 13th, right?
No way. I don't want to go through that again.
So, you know, if it comes down to a Abbott and O'Rourke race,
which it most likely will.
Most likely will. You know, we've talked about Texas. We're really almost a purple state, if you will.
Ooh.
Are we? Well, I guess that's the question. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what people have been predicting for a long time.
Yeah.
In my mind, I don't think we'd get there at the earliest until 2024.
Okay.
And maybe even longer than that. We're not quite there. And so you look at it, and the closest race we've had was Beto O'Rourke challenging Ted Cruz, but that was several years ago. So in the 2020 election, I'm sorry, the Republicans won this state handily. Their margins are getting more narrow over time, but it's still a Republican state. And probably the most interesting thing that took place in 2020 in terms of the election was that Hispanic voters, which were seen as reliably Democratic, along the Rio Grande, they started shifting towards the Republican Party. Is that only related to Donald Trump? In other words, do they support him? Or is that going to be a permanent move where those voters actually could be solidly in Republican hands? And we'll find out this year.
Very interesting stuff there. I want to touch on local races. 2 city council races up for grabs. And so those are the seats held by Dr. Travis Craver and my mind just went blank.
Kyle McAllister.
Yes,
Kyle
McAllister. Wow, I just
yes.
went blank. So those 2 races. So as of right now, both of those gentlemen have announced or actually have filed, to run again. So what are we thinking there?
Well, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the filing period lasts until February. So I think February 18th, I think. So there's time for people if they want to run. But what I look at in terms of challenging an incumbent, is there an issue that is driving voters? And you look at the city today, and I don't see that issue that is driving voters to be angry at incumbents. Mm-hmm. And so if anybody's out there thinking they want to challenge, one of these 2 incumbents, what is the issue you're going to seize on that has resonance with the voters? And right now I don't see it, but it's possible it's out there. Mm-hmm. There might be something that gets voters going between now and the May election.
So it's place 5 and place 6 of City Council up for grabs, and that election, of course, is in May of this year. So we've got a little bit of time there. So we'll certainly see what happens. Talking about McAllister quickly, the issue of his quote, his alleged racist post that he made, is that still an issue, or is that? I mean, he already won an election since then.
Exactly, he won an election since then. So in essence, it's been handled by the voters. Everybody's moved on.
Okay.
And I think a lot of voters might have in the back of their mind, but it was handled in the past. Yeah. That's it.
And Dr. Craver, this is his second election that he's going for. So he's going again. So we'll see there.
Yeah, he seems to like the job and thinks, well, I've got things I still want to accomplish. So therefore, let's run again. The question is there anybody out who's going to challenge either of these gentlemen for those seats? And we'll see. We've got several weeks to go, filing period.
Very good. And he's the youngest one there too. So, all right, Dr. Paul Fabrizio, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Travis. I appreciate it.
We'll be right back.
Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
All right, that does it for this week's edition of Big Country Politics. We'll see you next week, same time, same place.